I am so excited for today's conversation here on the Unmeasured podcast. I am joined by my dear friend, Chelsea Connors. Chelsea, I'm so happy to have you here on the podcast with us.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
For anyone who doesn't know Chelsea, well, number one, you're in for such a treat. And number two, I would love to introduce her and her incredible work to you. Chelsea is a high performance coach, a breathwork facilitator, and a former therapist. She blends all of these modalities to help you reclaim your voice, embrace change, and build unshakable confidence. She is also the creator of the brand Soft Power, which is also an amazing coaching program as well. So, Chelsea, we're just so lucky to have you here in all of your wisdom. And you know that I could talk to you, every day for hours and hours. And I feel very lucky that I get to be part of this conversation with you.
You are so sweet and the best. And it is likewise. I feel like so much of since I've known you, we've had so much in synchronicity where one of us would go through something and then the next. And I'm just so grateful for you and your friendship. And now to get to have a conversation and share it with others.
I'm so thrilled. There are so many synchronicities between us and in what we've gone through. And just for a little background for people who are listening, Chelsea and I were in a really small, intimate mastermind for 2 years together, which was led by Naomi Powell. And you can go back and listen to episode 2 with her. I know so many people love that episode. Naomi is amazing, and we really have her to thank for bringing us together on such a deep, close level. And when you're in a small mastermind like that with people, you just really get a peek behind the curtain of their life. And so we really got to be like in it together, doing work together, doing life together, behind the scenes of each other's lives and goals and dreams and all that for 2 years. And I feel like that is just a bond that we get to carry forever and ever now, even though the mastermind is over.
Yeah, absolutely. It was such a phenomenal and unique experience. And the relationships that we all got to develop through that are like unwavering. They're just amazing.
I truly cherish them. And honestly, that little backstory is connected to the question that we're going to talk about today, which is really like adult relationships, right? So we had a listener write in with this question: how do you navigate heavily changing relationships, friends and otherwise, as we grow further into adulthood?
Wow, I love this question. It's so good. It's so good.
I love it and I hate it. And the reason I don't hate the question, but I feel like something that is really, I have learned about myself that is really hard for me. And I have just had to develop skills and practices to move through the discomfort of this and like
Uh-huh.
the hardness of this for me is changing relationships. It's very
Hmm.
hard for me when a relationship changes, specifically when a relationship goes from being really close or maybe like what would feel more intimate, like just a deeper connection or more involvement in each other's lives, to then it being less so. And
Hmm.
not that that means something bad happened or that anyone did anything wrong. It's very natural and it happens. But I have seen over and over again for me in my life that those very normal, natural transitions in relationships are really challenging for me. And so that's why I say that I hate this question. I don't actually hate the question. I'm like glad to be having this conversation. But I just want to share, like, right up front, that this is something that that I feel very sensitive to in
Hmm.
my life. And it's something that I've had to do a lot of personal work around. Do you feel that way, Chelsea, or do you feel differently?
I think maybe some of the situations that I was in throughout my young, like super young adulthood years, maybe changed my perception of this because I was kind of forced into a different relationship with relationships or friendships in a sense. So, just to share a little bit more context around what I mean, when I was a young adult, my husband was in the military. And so we moved a lot. And so it forced me to get really comfortable with change. And a lot of times that impacted the relationships that I have. And so I got comfortable with the fact that because my life circumstances were always changing so substantially and often abruptly, of course it made sense that some relationships were going to change. And also I was physically in a different place a lot of times. Um, so there's like that degree of it. And then there's also the inevitable that doesn't take away from how hard it is when relationships change. Like maybe if you think that you thought somebody was going to be in your life in the same way, in the same capacity forever and ever and ever. And then as you grow and you all evolve and change, and it becomes clear that you're growing in different ways or different directions. And there's just kind of this like natural shift that happens, like that can be really hard, or even if it's more of a conscious thing. So I think yes, and like,
Yeah,
yeah, it's like super hard and challenging. And I feel like because of my life circumstances, I was forced to accept it maybe more. What is the word that I'm looking for? Like I had to look it in the face at a younger age, I think, than maybe some people do.
totally. Do you feel like because you have had this sort of like very intense experience of relationships changing because of moving from place to place to place, and I feel like with the military it's like that's going to happen maybe more often than it would for the average person who's not in a military family,
Yeah.
do you notice a different inner experience around a change in relationship where you physically have to move to a different location versus a change in relationship where you're both still in the same location, but something changes in like in the dynamic? Do you know what I mean by that? Where it's
Yes.
like, well, there's a change, there's a shift in this relationship or like the role that we're playing in each other's lives or the connection that we have. And I can't really blame it on like someone moving. Not blame, maybe is not the right word, but you know what I'm
Yes.
saying. It's like that is not the reason why. Where I feel like when you move, it's like, oh my gosh, this is so bittersweet and sad, but also exciting because it's this new thing. And I'm
Yeah.
like really gonna miss like seeing you as often. But that to me, like I notice a difference in how I feel about that kind of dynamic, like whether
Yeah.
it's when I moved from Chicago to Columbus or, you know, like good friends have moved away. That feels easier for me
So
to
there's a reason.
accept. Yes,
Mhm, mhm.
rather than, oh, we're just not talking as much anymore. Or like, oh, like life has sort of taken us in two different directions. And we used to
Yeah.
be really close and like now we're not anymore.
Yeah, I think they're totally different experiences, right? When the circumstances of our life, um, like something like a move, not that that's the only one, but causes it versus when it's more of like a relational shift and change that is just naturally occurring between different people. Yeah, I think they're very different experiences. Absolutely.
How or what helps you to navigate those kinds of shifts, or what have you seen
Yeah.
be helpful with your clients, whether it's now your coaching clients or previously, you know, clients in therapy? What do
Yeah.
you feel like are some helpful things for navigating the discomfort of these very natural progressions, you know, in some relationships? Not that every relationship changes in that way, but some of
Mhm.
them do. And I think every single person is going to have experiences where they do. I mean, especially like pandemic, right? Pandemic,
Yeah.
post pandemic, I think that that really shifted a lot of relationships.
Mhm.
And so I'm sure everyone listening is can think of at least some moments during that time.
Yeah. A couple of things that I find to be helpful personally and also have shared with clients at varying times. So there's an analogy that I think of when I think about friendships or relationships at large, which is I think about a bullseye or like a target, like where you throw darts. And I think about if we're in the center, and then you know how there's rings that grow as you go further away from the target. I think about the fact that, okay, if we're in the center, then our closest people are kind of in that innermost circle. And then we go a ring out. And then maybe we have friendships that are still close, but they're maybe not the people that you're calling at 2 a.m. when you need some help. And then we go a degree further, and that's maybe like colleagues or people that you enjoy having conversation with, but they don't know like the ins and outs of your everyday life. And so I think about relationships kind of as existing somewhere on that bullseye or that target. And I always remind myself that the circles or the rings, if you will, are permeable. Like people can come closer and they can go further out. And for me, that helps um depersonalize some of the ebbs and flows that might come in different types of relationships. So I think that helps just for me to have an analogy or a visualization of it. And then I also, have you ever heard the cheesy quote? Like some people are in your life for a season
Is
and a
it like a
reason.
season, a reason, or
Yeah, it's both of
like,
those.
is there, I'm like, is it maybe some people are in your life for a lifetime, some for a season, some for a reason.
Yeah. What is that quote? Oh gosh, that's gonna bug me so much.
But I know what you mean. It's like not
I found it.
everyone. Oh, you did. Okay, what does it say?
People come into your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. When you figure it out, which it is, you'll know exactly what to do, is what it says.
I love that.
Yeah. So I just find like I try and remember that even when I don't like it. Like I can think about some really close relationships that I had in the past that I thought would be for a lifetime, 100%. That as we started growing and everybody starts doing what we do in our lives and prioritizing different things or following different interests, it just became clear and evident that maybe that wasn't going to be the case. And like that's can be gut wrenching when that
Yes.
happens. And so I think about like, yes, the reminder of the bullseye, yes, the reminder of impermanence, and also permission to grieve, right? It's like grieving a dream of what I thought would be, maybe, and that's okay to go through that process, whether it's a romantic relationship or a friendship or familial relationships, even like there's so many different ways. Um, so per usual, I think just allowing ourselves to feel all of the discomfort around it is an essential part of the practice. And then last piece I'll say on this, because I know I'm rambling, is I think another critical piece is feeling connected to yourself. Because when you're making decisions that are in integrity with you and you're prioritizing connections that feel fulfilling and meaningful to you, I think it gives you more of an ability to have more acceptance around the changes that will inevitably occur in relationships. And so that helps me too. Like I constantly come back to that of like, this is really hard and this really sucks sometimes. And I know that I'm being true to myself. And I know that where I'm investing time, energy, love, connection, all of the things is supporting me for the season of life that I'm in right now.
Absolutely. I love all of the points that you made. And I think, especially that last one for me, really hits on something that I think is going to hit on something for a lot of people listening, which is this idea that a shift in a relationship dynamic doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong.
Yeah.
And to be able to have that self connection
Mhm.
first, you know, like first, foremost, like at the deepest level, to be able to come back there and say, like, I have been prioritizing things in a way that truly is like right for me right now. And that doesn't mean that I've done anything like bad or wrong to someone who maybe, you know, that relationship used to be a really big priority, and things have shifted.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think, yeah, the frameworks, not frameworks, those like thought processes, it's interesting because I want to say it helped me like depersonalize it a little bit, but obviously it's a personal thing, but maybe not take ownership of aspects that, or create stories that aren't actually true about the experience. And so I'm like less susceptible to overthinking about those aspects.
Yes, I am so curious about your thoughts on how social media impacts like this part of the process because I think a lot about my childhood and like my parents in my childhood often and how um like they came home and like we were in the house and there really weren't a lot of things taking their attention away from being in our house, right? Like we didn't have, I mean, when I was little, I don't think the internet. Like, do we even have a computer? Like I'm remembering, like pre
Yeah.
AOL and like the dial-in login and everything, like when I was, really little.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking like third, fourth grade, there were no cell phones there. I
Hmm.
mean, I certainly don't remember my parents just like sitting for hours on the landline, like chatting it up with people, like we were home and we were home. And like the only way you would really stay connected to someone who wasn't really present in your life might be a holiday card, like, and they
Hmm.
they all used to come with like long letters where you'd get updates about the whole year. And I think that was like so sweet and what an endearing time. And I still love people who like include a letter with a holiday card. I'm very into that. I'm not a letter writer, but I love to get them. So if you send me a letter, thank you. And then, maybe you'd like run into someone somewhere, or maybe like
Hmm.
something big would happen and you would receive a phone call about it. And otherwise, I think as life sort of naturally and organically ebbed and flowed, you were just really present with the people who were, just really like significant in your life at that time. And there could be like fond thoughts of other people,
Yeah.
but it's not so like in your face. And I think now we are so pseudo connected to
Yeah.
basically anyone in our life, right? Like, it could be people you went to elementary school with, or past coworkers, or a friend group that maybe you were really close with, and then life kind of took people in different directions. But because of social media,
Hmm.
we sort of see that all the time. And I think it
Yeah.
can bring up feelings of, oh no, like I don't even know what the feeling is, but uh, something a little like icky or something where you're like, oh wow, I used to be like really close to that person. I haven't talked to them in a long time, but now I just like saw this post about their vacation and I'm feeling things and I don't even know what these things are. Like,
Yeah.
do you experience that? And do you feel like social media kind of makes just the natural like ebbs and flows of relationships a little like trickier than maybe it was like back in the olden days of letters?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think I've ever thought about social media from this exact perspective, but it's so true. I definitely have felt that. I can think about it even as you were describing that. I was like, oh, there's like 3 to 5 random people from high school or maybe like a drama camp that I went to when I was 12 that I'm still connected to on social media that I have not talked to since I was at that drama camp when I was 12. And it's like, yeah, I think what it does, I I think some of what I experience with that can be just more susceptibility to comparison or um FOMO, or it's just like so much information to be constantly taking in. Or I know some people, I don't think that I necessarily feel this way, but I know some people get wrapped up in like, should I have more friends? Should I have less
Mm.
friends? Should I be maintaining relationships better? And I think I think it complicates things so much more to be so aware of so many people all the time. And I think it puts so much more onus on us as individuals to have to manage that, notice it, like acknowledge what's going on internally, and then figure out how we as individuals want to navigate it. Like it just creates a whole nother like line of self-awareness to manage, I think.
Totally. I think awareness is such a great word for that, because you're just aware of so many more people all the time in a way that I don't really think we're like mentally or emotionally built to be able like to have the capacity for it once. And so it can get just like a little bit, it can get like a little jumbly.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's pros to it too, right? Because I think a lot
Yes.
of people like maybe can feel inspired or can have people that, I don't know, maybe you get to the next phase of your life and you're like, oh, I actually align a lot with what this person shares. And maybe I want to rekindle that relationship. So I think it's tough, right? Because there's benefit, can be benefit, but, and also it's so much to just have in your face all the time.
Yes, I think there are benefits to it, and there are also things about it that make life more challenging when it comes to like relationship
Hmm.
dynamics.
Hmm.
I know that, in recent time you became a mom,
Yes.
and I feel like having a kid can also really shift capacity for like different relationships and just your emotional, mental, physical capacity, what you have time for. Did you
Mm,
notice, and also like even within, not that everyone is married when they have a child. I don't want to, I'm not, that's not an assumption that I make, but Chelsea, I know you are married. I know that I am
yeah.
married. So speaking like specifically to our situations, it's like even within your relationship with your partner, right? With your
Yeah.
spouse, like having a kid changes that dynamic too. And so what have been your experiences around relationship shifts since having
Yeah.
your son?
Such a good question. So just for anybody listening, my son is 10 months old now. And so I am very much so still figuring this out. Um, I think for me, I have like my core friendships, relationships that I've established that I know so far, at least, like help me feel the most connected and fulfilled. And so I've done my best to maintain those, but the way I engage with them might look different. Like if you talk to my brother, he will make fun of me because I hardly ever answer the first time that he calls me. And it's typically not because I don't want to talk to him, but like maybe I've put my phone down for an hour or I want to be present or maybe my son needs me or whatever. And so I'm working on communicating like changes in immediacy and like the expectations around that with people in my inner world. Some people notice and some people don't notice at all. But I think that so far, that's one of my biggest shifts is recognizing not everything is an emergency. Not every text needs to be responded to right this moment.
Mhm.
Which before I just had the capacity to do. So it didn't impede my life in any way. Whereas now, if I felt like I needed to constantly be answering things right away, it would feel like overwhelming, but it's still uncomfortable for me because that was my norm. So I think that's like one shift. And then I'm definitely still learning how to not overcommit my time. And so that's something that I have not figured out in a sense. But it's something I'm well aware of that I'm like working on. And then anything, honestly, that just feels like a maybe I feel like I should do this, but I don't really want to, is just an immediate no for me in
Yeah.
terms of social things. Like I don't I feel very connected and I'm so grateful. I get a lot of fulfillment and connection through the work that I do, even though I work by myself and I work virtually. I'm working with humans like all day long. So I'm very grateful to have that. And then I'm like, if I have one in-person social something a week, I'm like good.
Yeah.
So I'm not somebody who needs a ton. So right now I'm just like, yeah, it works. That works for me. It's kind of where I'm at so far.
I love that. I love so many things that you hit on, the moving away from feeling the pressure for immediacy where it really isn't necessary, and almost just like shifting those expectations within yourself.
Mhm.
And I mean, that's really also like changing a nervous system response
Yeah. Yeah.
to a stimulus too. It's like a text message comes in, like what happens in your body in that
Mhm.
moment, and can you like take a breath and can you say like this is important to me, but it doesn't have to happen like right here right now in this moment. And
Mhm.
I think that that is so huge. I love that, and I also love that you give yourself permission to make plans within sort of these personal boundaries that you have for yourself. Like right now, one social thing a week feels really good. You make plans within that, like honoring again that self connection first, and then showing up accordingly, like in your relationships.
Mhm.
And then, like, the last thing that I love that you hit on was this idea of if you're like, ugh, I don't know, I'm not sure, that's a no. I feel like, no one's ever more excited to make a plan than like when the plan gets made. So if you feel like that when it's like time to make the plan, like imagine how you'll feel after like a week of like working and parenting, and then it's on your calendar. It's gonna be a
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
I love that. Oh my goodness. I love that.
100%. Yeah. And then I think too, like just another note on the immediacy in relationships. I just like my husband and I are working on establishing like one no phones night a week where we just have like family time. And going back to your story about thinking about what it was like for us growing up, like it is now so effortful to try and establish even an environment where you can be present. And so we're kind of experimenting with how we can do that to facilitate more connection between us as a couple and then also presence with our son. And yeah, it's interesting how things that used to be the only option now feel so effortful and like such a gift that we
Yeah.
can give ourselves of like a night without a phone or it's like what? But it is so like I don't know. It's my reality at least.
Totally. I love that. I love that you all are being intentional about that, like as a couple and as a family. That's really, really awesome.
Yeah. TBD on how it goes. We'll
Yeah.
try. We're very much so experimenting.
We just got back from spring break, and we were actually on spring break with a family. They're just like such dear friends of ours. And I know I had mentioned COVID sort of changing, it changed a lot of relationship dynamics just
Yeah.
very intensely.
Mhm.
And I never want to be like sugarcoating the pandemic, but one of the really like amazing blessings for me and like for our family that came out of the pandemic was that
Mhm.
friends that we had had before, like they were friends of ours. We got so close with them through the pandemic, and they truly became like family to us,
Mhm.
and we call them our family. Like
Oh,
we get to travel together, we do holidays together, like we just do life together, and it's
yeah.
so amazing. And I just feel so thankful for that. Like while there were many relationships that shifted in like different directions for me during the
Mhm.
pandemic, and it was like a time for me of deep self-reflection of how I was showing up maybe in like some unhealthy ways in my friendships, like just some codependent ways, and feeling like I, needed to, people pleasing, codependency, all these things. Like
Yeah.
it was such a great chance for me to take a step back and really reflect and work on doing things differently, which then I think also led to changing dynamics in relationships for me because I was just showing up
Yeah.
differently.
Yeah.
It also led to this like really beautiful like deepening of like our friendship and relationship with them, which it was so awesome. And we were just on spring break all together, and I was like, I just want to take basically like a week off of my phone. And so I deleted like all social media off my phone, and I just like left my phone in the hotel room. I
Mhm.
literally checked my phone on Monday through Friday once every morning for like private client messages on Voxer. I just
Yeah.
opened up the Voxer app, listened, responded, and then put my phone like in the safe. And it was the most incredible experience. I felt I had 5 full days without a single ounce of feeling anxious, which
Mm.
as someone who has, I mean,
Mhm.
I experience anxiety most days,
Yeah.
and I try not to over identify with my anxiety, but
I heard that little adjustment.
it has been an ever present,
I
an
can
ever
relate.
present, like thing in my life for as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
And it was really amazing. And I think you know, when I was reflecting on it, I'm like, wow, 5 days without anxiety. And it was so interesting. On the fifth day, I woke up in the middle of the night and my lack of anxiety woke me from my sleep. I shot straight up in bed and it was like my brain realized that it hadn't been anxious about anything in 5 days. And
Yeah.
it just started to panic. Like anything that you could be anxious about, my brain was like, have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? And it was this really interesting moment of just like, wow, this is so my subconscious just freaked out that I haven't been
Mhm.
anxious in 5 days. And I could just notice it and
Yeah.
kind of move through it and go back to sleep.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
I think, part of the absence of anxiety for those 5 days was that I was with people that I feel really comfortable and safe with.
Mhm.
And I was also very free from the overstimulation of being inundated all the time on these devices. And I'm those two things just really allowed me to feel so peaceful. And because for me, my anxiety shows up in social, around social dynamics,
Yeah, yeah.
it was it was the absence of the perfect storm. I'm with people that I'm so comfortable with,
Mhm.
and I'm not seeing any of these little things day to day that remind me to worry about something. Oh, if I'm not being reminded of that, it's actually isn't something that I worry about. And I just thought that was so fascinating.
Yeah. I think a theme that I hear in what you're describing, which I so relate to, and I think is so relevant for this conversation around how changing relationships is when we let go of something, what are we opening up space for? So whether it's all right, let me let go of my phone and social media for the week, and I'm making space to be fully present, really joyful, super connected to people that I love, and in this moment. And same thing with friendships, right? It sounds like for the pandemic, letting go of maybe some of the people pleasing or trying to stay connected with people that maybe you've just grown in different ways, made space that you could cultivate really meaningful connections with this one family that you're describing in this example. And I think the same has been true for me of recognizing that so much of what we fill our lives with has a little bit of a give and a take. And so it's just what what are you pouring into in your friendships or relationships? And does that feel, yeah, like it's giving you what you need also? Or what is it like taking away from your ability to make space for in other ways? I think that's yeah, just something else that we think I don't think we pause enough to consider when we think about friendships or relationships of any kind in our
Yeah,
life.
absolutely. And I I just want to re-highlight something that we talked about a little earlier that I feel really connects with this, which is that it's so important that you make space to feel however you're feeling about
Mhm.
a relationship or a transition or a change, or maybe even some loneliness that you're feeling. Maybe
Yeah.
some relationships have sort of, moved away, but there haven't been new ones that have kind of come in and taken up that space. And so I think it's even, for some people it might be grief, for some people it might be loneliness,
Mhm.
whatever it might be, just letting yourself feel that. And then also choosing to move forward, taking action that is connected to yourself and what you value and where
Yeah.
you feel really drawn to in your life. And
Mhm.
that sort of cycle of feeling, thinking, acting is something that I know we both work on with our clients, in the
Yeah.
work that we do. And I think it really connects with this. And
Mhm.
I I also will just say that I am someone who very strongly believes that as human beings, we need each other and
Yes,
that we
same.
are made to be like in relationship with each other. And not that every person in your life has to be someone that like you really count on or really shows up for you. But like, I do think we are meant to be in like those like deeper, closer relationships where we are really intentionally supporting each other, and not that we're always going to do it perfectly, and not that we're never going to, like let each other down or hurt each other's feelings
Yeah.
unintentionally. And I think relationships require a lot of grace. And,
Hmm.
hopefully you're in relationships with people where you can assume positive intent, even when something doesn't go perfectly. But
Yeah.
like I think we are meant to like be there for each other in the ways that we're able to be.
Hmm.
And sometimes like our ability to be there for certain people like shifts,
Yep.
and maybe they either need to create those relationships with new people, or we need to create those relationships with new people. But I am very like turned off by a lot of the stuff that I see on Instagram around relationships, where it's like good vibes only, and like if
Hmm.
like it, if this person isn't like meeting all your needs, then they have to go, or like just
Yeah.
this feeling of like as if we're ever going to be just perfect for each other. And I think it creates a lot of unrealistic expectation for people in relationships, and it
Hmm.
might also take away from the ability of us being able to just really appreciate like the goodness in the relationships that we do have also.
Yeah. I think that is such a good point. And same for me. I think some of the messaging that's really common right now around on social media, at least around relationships, can almost present this idea that one person should be able to fulfill every source of connection that somebody might need. And, I think to build upon what you just shared, like I get different things from different people in my life.
Yes.
Like there are different conversations that I have with you than I would have with like my best friend from my childhood, than I would have with like my current coach and mentor. And all of those relationships are so deeply important to me in my life and I value them so very much. And to your point, like that doesn't mean that any one of those three random people that I just bought, like none of you are going to meet every single one of my needs. And I love you all just the same and in different ways. And so I think making our peace with that. But again, Sim, I think this connects back to also recognizing that connection is so important. Building a village is so important. I feel like I understand that on a even more bigger level after having a child.
Totally, totally.
But I think nothing can replace that self connection. Like that really has to be at the center of all of this so
Yep.
that it feels like you can let people be themselves without it making you bad, wrong, right, good, bad, like all of that. And you can experience your relationships differently with different people.
Absolutely. I could not agree more about the self connection being at the center of all of that. And the question of like, what am I making this mean about me? Like, y- all of a sudden it goes from making it mean like that you need to be like doing something differently in that relationship to like, oh, yeah, when people are in relationships with me, like they're free to be themselves. They feel comfortable
Yeah.
being themselves. And I feel comfortable being myself. And like then we're both safe and comfortable to like show up in this relationship, and we get to have a really unique dynamic that doesn't have to like check every box under the sun.
Hmm. Yeah. I think that's so pivotal. And yeah, I often find myself, and I'd be curious to hear if you experience this, but obviously the work that we do helps people learn more about themselves and grow and shift and change. And I frequently hear from clients once they start doing those things that they don't feel connected to certain people that they used to because they're changing or their dynamics or how they're relating to people change. And that can be a source of loneliness or friction, or sometimes cause doubt on like, is this okay? And so I'd be curious to hear if you experience that either for yourself or with clients. I know I have personally and professionally. And um, I think something that I work on with clients, which is really the bones of soft power, is this idea of both having compassion and having conviction. Like we can hold both, which I heard in what you were saying before too. I think we have very similar approaches. Like we need to feel the stuff, like we need to feel the wide range, and we can be really, really strong and steadfast that we are making decisions that feel right for who we are and where we are right now. And so I like to think about that when it comes to navigating this point that I hear a lot of people, and I'm making an assumption here that people who are listening to you and your
Yes.
podcast are
Yes.
doing like personal growth type development and working on their relationship to themselves and changing how they relate to other people. And so, yeah, I just would be curious to hear like your take on that when it comes up.
Absolutely. And it does come up often.
Mhm.
And I think that it also, before it even comes up, it can be something that people are afraid of that
Yeah.
can be a deterrent from moving forward with like their own inner healing work that feels important to them. It's like, this feels really
Yeah.
important to me, and I am afraid of what it will mean for my relationships. And I relate with that deeply around a lot of the like perfectionism work that I did with people pleasing.
Hmm.
That was even scarier than any of the my body work that I had to do, right? Around my
Yeah.
relationship with food or movement or my body. Like, I
Hmm.
think I always had a belief that by doing that work, my relationships with other people would get better, right? I'm like, if I'm not so at war with myself, surely this will help my other
Mm.
relationships. And that felt like a incentive. I was like, oh, I am incentivized by how this will lift up my other relationships. The people pleasing work, I had a very different feeling around that. I'm like,
Mm.
oh, will people want me around as much if I'm not just there to essentially always be, uplifting like their happiness and comfort?
Yep.
And that felt a little scarier. So I just want to acknowledge that I think it can
Hmm.
come up for people even before they start doing the work. They're
Yep.
like, ooh, I don't know. Is it going to be worth it for what this is going to do for my relationships? But I think when you do start to move forward, realizing like this is your like one beautiful life, and like you deserve to feel well in
Hmm.
your life and in your relationships. And I do think many relationships actually thrive when we do this work, and maybe some of them do shift and in a different way, like kind of falling away, or
Yeah.
that that they're not as close. But I think to be able to support people to learn to ride the waves of their discomfort
Hmm.
in these moments, like, is kind of like 95% of it. To
Yeah.
be able to stay in your discomfort rather than like running back to old coping mechanisms so that you don't have
Hmm.
to feel it really is so much of the work. And of course, you're moving through discomfort because you've identified what is important to you, and you're
Right.
being driven forward by that inner knowing of I want to be different, or like this is a value of
Hmm.
mine that I really want to embody. And so that makes you want to move forward. But then sometimes you start moving forward and it's like, oh, I'm so uncomfortable. And I think it's like helping people, also helping myself to be able to ride the waves of that discomfort is like 95%
Yeah.
of it. And then the wave passes and you're like, oh, I did it. Like I
Uh-huh.
made it through. I'm okay. That like these were stories that I was telling myself, or
Mhm.
these were like past wounds that I was really like, holding on to, but they don't define me anymore. These
Yeah.
past experiences don't define me anymore. And I really am like okay.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. I think that it just encompasses so much, right? Because it's the ability to know why you're moving forward the way that you are, and then to be able to notice that discomfort so that you can choose what to do with it. So you're not just like running from it. And then, as you mentioned, it's like this reaffirmation that we all deserve to have relationships in our life where we feel connected, cared for, loved, supported. And so I think that's so important. I asked that question, or like really honed in on that, because I hear and see that so many people stop themselves from growing or changing or trying something new in any way because they are so fearful of any degree of change or honestly like loss that could come from them changing. However, more often than not, I don't see that actually come to fruition. But
Totally.
it is part of the puzzle. So I think it's important to acknowledge. But I loved the way that you described it because I think you also hit on a lot of the things that I think about and kind of work with clients on when this is a big part of what's coming up for them as they're growing.
Yes. And I mean, I will share personally that my experience has been that maybe while I'm not, you know, dog paddling, hyper vigilant in my friendships anymore, there are some friendships that just naturally got a little quieter because
Yep.
I was not putting in 150% effort to keep it going, right? And it just naturally, got quieter, and that is okay.
Yeah.
But my really close friendships, I mean, friendships that I've had for decades have just gotten like richer and better. And
Hmm.
there is such a deeper feeling of safety for me in those relationships where like I just feel like I can relax and let the walls down.
Yeah.
And I have to imagine too, like it's probably nice for the people on the other side of the friendship to not feel I I'm putting so much weight on it,
Uh-huh. Hmm.
gosh, that was a lot to put on people, right? Like if my whole identity is how I'm being like perceived in these relationships and then I let that go, it's like it's got to be nicer for them to be in these relationships too. And then like even in my most conflict full relationship, which is my marriage, right? Like I think of all my relationships, there's probably the most conflict in our marriage because there's just so many things we're working through every
Yeah.
single day, every single week. And I don't mean that I mean, we're not like fighting all the time or anything, but there's
Yeah,
things
it's
that
a
we
lot.
have. Yeah, there's a lot of conflict. And I think in that relationship, we just get better and better at it. Like,
Hmm.
and we're at a growing pains moment right now where like our kids are getting a little bit older. We're both like, careers are kind of picking up in different ways. And we're like, whoa, we sort of have to like re-navigate expectations and who owns what and how we work together through these things. And like
Yeah.
we're not through that. We're like very much in like the growing pains figuring it out. But I also feel confident and safe to do that
Mm.
because we practice it a lot. And
Yeah.
I think that's something also really beautiful that can come from it is that you just get way more comfortable and confident to navigate moments like that in a relationship, to
Hmm.
navigate change in a relationship without it feeling like scary or bad. It's just like, oh no,
Yeah.
this is healthy and this is good and
Mhm.
this is necessary to move us forward.
Yeah. It's almost like the conflict comes from it changes from viewing conflict as like this worst case scenario, avoid at all costs type of situation to like this is part of being in relationship with people, and different types of relationships are going to have different types of conflict, and that's changing the perspective around that, I think, is one of probably the most freeing things that we can do so that we don't feel like we're constantly quieting, muting, or shape shifting ourselves to avoid it at all costs.
Yes. And I think like to your point that you made so beautifully before, like that all comes back to your relationship with yourself.
Yep. Hmm. Yep. Like many other things in life. That's kind of where it all stems from.
Yes, I love it. Chels, thank you so much. I am just so grateful that I got to have this conversation with you and just very, very thankful for our ever evolving friendship in my life.
Likewise. Thanks so much for having me. I love this chat.